this user was getting a value error using an if functions inside of the OR function. Let's take a look at why that was happening and how we can actually get the desired result. So here's my recreation of the user spreadsheet. It looks like it's for tracking events in a game called Trench Crusade. There are tons of spreadsheets for tracking games. This is awesome. Great use case, honestly. They're specifically looking at this function, this formula here in column E. So they have if D2 equals victory, output 15, if D2 equals draw, output 10, if D2 equals defeat, output 7. And they have all of that wrapped up in the OR function. So it looks like what they're trying to do is have whichever one of these is accurate actually perform, actually output. So they want 15, 10, or 7 based on is it victory, draw, or defeat. And I think they're using the OR function to, as their understanding, to just make that work. Hey, show me whichever one of these 3 things is accurate. But that's not what the OR function does. The OR function says that it returns true if any of the provided arguments are logically true, and false if all of the provided arguments are logically false. So let me show the simplest example. Let's put true, false, true. And I'm going to put the OR function, and that's going to be I1, J1, and K1. Okay? It is returning true because any of the arguments are true. Let me change this to false, and this to false, and now my OR function is returning false. But if I change this, just this one, to true, it's going to return true. Okay, so OR returns true if any provided arguments are true, false if all of the provided arguments are false. It is the logical OR operator is what this does. So instead, let's build some formulas that actually perform what the user wants. Okay, I'm going to start with the one that is the most similar to what the user built. That is going to be nested if functions. So I'm going to start with an if function. My logical expression is going to be D3 equals victory. If that's the case, I want it to output 15. My value if false is going to be another if function, and if D3 equals draw, we're going to output 10. The value of false for this if function is going to be another if function, and that is if D3 equals defeat, output 7. Then no value if false. That works great, outputs the 15. If I change victory to draw, it outputs 10. If I change that to defeat, it outputs 7. And if I change that to not played yet, it doesn't output anything. So that one works great. Next, I'm going to do the ifs function. The ifs function is very similar to the nested if functions, but it does it in a single function call. So it says it evaluates multiple conditions and returns a value that corresponds to the first true condition. So instead of using an if function as the false return of a previous if function, I can just string the conditions together. So ifs D4 equals victory, then output 15. My second condition is D4 equals draw, output 10. And finally, D4 equals defeat. I promise I can spell. Output 7. Now, let me change victory to draw. That outputs 10. Draw to defeat. That outputs 7. That one works. Finally, there's also the switch function. This tests an expression against a list of cases and returns the corresponding value of the first matching case. So this was really nice because we can put in the condition once or the expression once and then compare different cases. So my expression is going to be D5, whatever's in cell D5. Case 1 is victory. And note that I don't need to say D5 equals victory because it's testing each case against the expression. So case 1 is victory, value 1 is 15. Case 2 is draw, value 2 is 10. Case 3 is defeat, value 3 is 7. And then I can put a default here. I'm going to go ahead and just leave that blank. So victory is showing 15, draw shows 10, defeat shows 7, and if I change that to not played yet, it outputs nothing. So I like all three of these. There are reasons to go with any of them. Honestly, I still sometimes use nested if functions. Sometimes the logic of it is just a little bit easier to follow. Ifs is probably the go-to, but when I'm only going to comparing to a single expression or a single cell, switch really is the way to go for this case. But for others, it might be ifs, it might be nested if functions, and it might even be a lookup table. You could actually do this. I just barely thought of this. You could also do this in a lookup table. Victory, draw, defeat. 15, 10, 7. And I could say equals XLOOKUP, search key, my lookup range, my result range. And now I could use this as well for victory, draw, and defeat. So I like that one too. And that one can be nice because you can see what your inputs and outputs are separate from the formula itself. But all of these work. And that's really one of the things I love about building in spreadsheets is there's not usually one right answer. There is an input and there is a desired output. Get there, right? Some things are going to be a little bit more efficient. Some things are going to be a little bit easier to read, and some things are going to be a little bit easier to edit down the line. But at the end of the day, if you know that what you want is victory, draw, and defeat to output 15, 10, and 7, there are several ways to get there, and all of them work. Okay? So I would probably go with this switch method, or I would go with this XLOOKUP method. I would especially go with the XLOOKUP method if I have more than 3 or 4 cases, because then it's much easier to have it separate and not have to weed through the entire formula. But switch would probably be my go-to for a few, and then beyond that I would go with XLOOKUP, and the others still work if that's the way the logic works best for you. So I hope this helped. Or the OR function does not work like this. And get the right output you need, and there are several ways to get there. So don't necessarily be thinking what is the right way or what is the way. There are so many ways that you can get to the output, the outcome that you want. Hope this helped.